Okay. I've done something wrong. Okay. That's what's wrong.
Yeah, and then you can share your content.
Okay, perfect. Well, now I don't feel so silly earlier for it being on mute. We'll get through it together, guys. If it's not the Wi-Fi going down, it's something else. But let's see here. We're gonna share screen, add to our stuff. Now, I share the long line of ladies. I actually, if you've seen my presentation before, you will know that I typically actually start this in a different place. And I want to amend how I tell this, because at the end of the day, I don't want to find ways to prevent us from dying. I want to find ways to help us live. And while that might seem like a very small difference in words, it actually is on the level of paradigm difference, like thinking of a world where Indigenous lives are thriving. That is the world we came from before. And through our ancestry, that is the world we have ties to. And in many ways, I think right now we see ourselves in a world that's struggling to see a way different. And we're lucky that if you are Indigenous, you have access to, in your body even, a world that was different. And it's going to be us bringing that world to life. The first step is just even knowing that it's possible. And in many ways, I know that this is true because it's not just true for me. I have here a collage. I wish I had, I needed more pictures. And I wanted to do a collection. Some of them are pictures of my family members. Some of them are people I went to high school with. Growing up, like I said, I am a member of the Yurok tribe, the largest surviving tribe in California. We are located about 6 hours north of the Bay Area, right on the Klamath River, where the redwoods and the salmon are. That is our home. And I'm actually the kind of person who didn't really know how big a redwood was or how lucky I was to have them until I went to live back east. And let's just say we have bigger trees where I'm from. I didn't realize how lucky I was. But not only am I lucky that that's just where I've called home, but it's where my people have called home for time immemorial. My maternal line goes back to this place forever. And many of the women that I now have included in the database of a certain age that have been taken through violence in our state, and in particular, the northern part of our state, which you'll learn a little bit more about shortly. There are people that I knew about because we found the report online, or their family had brought us the info through a focus group. It was because there were people I had grown up with, people I had gone to school with. Right now, at minimum, I would say, since I began this work in 2016, but really picked up steam in 2019, 4 people that I went to K through 12 taken through violence, missing or murdered. You know, if it was 12 people in a school of thousands, that'd be one thing, but our graduating class in high school was 250 people. So these were people that I had known since I was very young. And that's hard to know because I came to this epidemic as a scholar. I was a prisoner reentry and unemployment, poverty, inequality. That's what my first book's going to be about. And my tribe was starting to work on missing and murdered. And it was because, as I'll show you later, a great majority of the cases in California are exclusively taking place in the northern part of the state, almost exclusively in a 2 to 3 county region, of which a large part is my tribe's ancestral territory. And so it's our women being taken. It's also people who come there, both native and non-native, who are taken. You know, you don't want to play into media portrayals too much, but if you've ever seen Murder Mountain on Netflix, I'm from Humboldt County, that's home. And that, I was like, I don't know who's watching in the world, but like that stuff's real. For better or for worse, this is a place where people very frequently go missing or are taken through violence, but this is disproportionately true for our Indigenous women and Two-Spirit relatives. Now, I will share maybe a little bit more about these guys in the vigil, but I did want to say their names now. Tawny Irvin, Mariah Lindgren, Emily Rissling, and Kason Crutchfield are all people that their families and their communities consider as lost to this epidemic. They are here included in the different media coverage on, different ways they were taken. And I think it's important to start with a tangible example of vibrance and to end with vibrance is because at the end of the day, I hate that if you were to Google any of these people, this is what would come up. This is how they're remembered. And so as we work on this epidemic, we also have to realize that each of these people is so much more. I mean, I wish, I got a lot of things going on, so I should have prepared longer, but I took only a little bit to get these pictures together. And it was just the thought of, when we're talking about this, we have to realize that yes, the numbers are hugely important because certain eyes hear certain things. And if they don't see it as real to them in a certain, usually quantitative data way, it's not real. But we have to realize each one of these numbers, each one of these cases, every line in our Excel spreadsheet is a real person. And that every one of those people has a family and every one of those people mattered and had someone wondering where they were the minute the worst was feared. And what can sometimes be hard to read about kind of research and coverage is that sometimes there's an expectation that wouldn't be true. That the people who are targeted for violence or have been taken through missing and murdered are people that weren't deeply loved, that weren't deeply traditional, who weren't having people looking for them from the first minutes they were worried about them. I think of Emily in particular. She was the year ahead of me in high school, and I had looked up to her my whole life. She's always someone, I want to transition into my work and what I do, but I did forget I had this. This is my fam. This is, I don't have my tattoo, but if anyone's seen my sleeve, this is my great-grandma, my two great-grandma, Alice Spot. Two different pictures of her. Wish I had the one of her smiling. I should have dug it up. And then my grandma, the link in between us. And I always like to show this because, we know so much about how trauma travels across time. I mean, tribal communities have known since contact, and we haven't known perhaps the words and the DNA epigenetic mechanisms, et cetera, but we have known on a soul wound level that we have been hurt and that without the medicine for that wound, it accumulates across time. It's called historical trauma, but then we also see the accumulation of trauma with the things we experience in our own lives. But a lot of people don't know, but if you've been in any of my classes, you learn, I'm pretty sure both learn, that trauma is something that if, you're connected to your grandma through your mother, that as an egg cell inside the fetus that was your mother, you walked with your grandmother in those first neonatal times. And that means then that what your grandma experienced, a lot of times people want to say this issue is so long ago, get over it. What does it matter? Well, when you count it up in grandmas, it's a lot closer than you think. I also, though, I always like to share this, though, because I am someone who has spent a lot of time far from home, and I never realized how unique the California Indian experience was until I got a chance to kind of experience the diversity of Indian country at large. And it's a gift that we are now in a position to lead the way in this issue, because although our contact story is much more recent. It wasn't until after the discovery of gold in 1849 that anyone who was non-native lived up that far north, or in the state at all, basically, at least northern Central California. The missions having a separate but adjacent history. If we think of California essentially as one of the last frontiers, which meant we needed it to be rid of Indians sooner. And so in the first 2 years after gold was discovered, by all accounts, 2 out of 3 California Indians were dead, which means that anyone today who is a California Indian is the descendant of a genocide survivor. That also means that in a global sense, we have a perspective on things that unfortunately we have lived through the apocalypse a few times on a soul and a cultural level. And we are fortunate, though, that even with that, we have access to our culture. We were never removed. Our reservation sits within some of our most sacred places. And so we have that direct tie to our land, which is vital for us. And I make a claim, probably every Indigenous people, that is the source, that is the heart of it all. And that's also why our women are hurt, because the land is the source and our women are the brokers of that relationship. Now, to dive back into today, you see, as I said, I have worked on this project formally now since 2020. We actually got the funding on the eve of the pandemic. I remember December 2019, I just offended, I'd come back for a victory lap at home, and we'd gotten this funding, and we just were gonna dream up this most amazing project. We all know what happened just a couple months later. But I'm also very happy to say that we, as a tribe, did incredible work to document the scope and severity of missing and murdered in the northern part of the state, which is hugely important now that we know what it looks like across the state as a very regional problem. Not to say that every region does not also experience this, terribly so, but because think of beyond this issue, the different variations across California and how that has ramifications for a whole host of interventions, institutions, what have you. Missing and murdered is no different, but my work starts with my tribe. And Emily, like I said, she turned 35 this February. She's a mother of 2. Her son is a teenager, not quite yet, I guess a middle schooler, maybe a teen, I don't know, it happens fast. He's right there though, and then her daughter is still just a toddler. And she came from one of the most, I would say, most connected dancing families in our community. She was someone who I'd looked up to since I was a teenager because she was so culturally grounded and had literally family on every river in every village. That also meant that when she fell on hard times, and as a result of both domestic violence and mental health conditions, coupled with substance use disorder, it was not for the lack of trying across quite literally almost an entire county and multiple tribes worth of resources and apparati, if that's some apparatuses, whatever that word is, to try and help her. And at the end of the day, that is what grips my chest most, is if Emily can be taken, there's no one who's safe. There was no one more loved, there was no one more protected, there was no one more cultural, no one more grounded. And none of that changed how we talk about her now. I didn't know there was something worse than finding out your loved one had been killed, but there is. It's never knowing what happened. It is something that takes from you on the level of bone. Think of all the happy occasions that, you know, when someone's gone, you get that chance to mourn. And that's what often I've been learning in my work. One thing that's difficult is that although death and grief, loss looks different post-invasion, many tribes, my own included, had ways to deal with death. We had ways to deal with loss. And those allowed us to grieve and to send those people on their journey in a good way. And when we don't get that closure, when we don't get their body, we don't get that chance. And that is something that, again, has has only a magnifying loss across time. And I, at the same time, had the chance because, as I said, you know, I was working this, and honestly, she was just a very close friend. She was my right hand during my dissertation. None of the things that I did, that you'll see someday in my book, would have been possible without Emily. And she actually at one point told me, we got to help our guys first. In our way, we have always been healers. Our women are our doctors. And she said, our men are sick. We made it out. We got to college. We got our degrees. We need to help our guys, and then we can tell our story. She won't be here to write that story with me. And I can't even say that her story would have started when she started getting locked up or when she started getting picked up because she was walking around nude and doing things that should have, perhaps in a white woman, been seen as reasons to get her help, or not seen as reasons to get her help. No matter how many times she was picked up and released, for some reason, there was never any bookings. There was never enough to go on. She was brilliant. And so when she could talk her way out of some stuff. And quite honestly, she needed intervention that would have been mandated, court mandated. And she actually was arrested roughly 2 weeks before she went missing. And as is the case with many of our missing and murdered cases, that because we refuse to respond to the mental health crisis, because we've refused to support our lives before we're taken, it is the jailhouse that sees us last. And so no one really knows who the last person to see Emily was, but everyone wonders, had the judge kept her? Had they taken her to treatment? Had there been a facility in the area that could accommodate her co-occurring issues of substance use disorder and other mental health conditions? If that had been the case, would we have the missing persons flyer up today? And it was a front row seat to what happens when a case like that comes in, where the ball is dropped, who falls through the cracks. And at this point, it was 2 years in October. I don't like saying it will be 3 years this October, because I hope that between here and October, maybe someday I could say that's when she was missing, but maybe we'll say someday that we were able to put her somewhere where her family can visit her, where we could give her those things so she can go in a good way. But like I said, if it could happen to her, it could happen to anyone. And so I am keeping an eye on the time. We will, at about 6 o'clock, we're going to open it up for questions. But I did want to share a couple of clips because Emily's case has been covered in different ways. And it's always hard because her family's been talking about it for 2.5 years now. How do you heal? You don't heal until you know what happened. But how do we ask them to keep telling their story without something coming of it? And so I first just have to thank the Risling family and families like them for being willing to bring their pain for us to learn from. And with that, I want to share some videos as well as is this? Yeah, it is a video of a song that is now often sung to honor those taken, but is sung by Emily's family. Let's see here. Okay, now time out though. Last time we did the video, everything imploded. I am going to. I'm sorry the speaker's quiet because we're not plugged into the room, but we're gonna unmute this ×2 and mute that one. Yeah, okay. Oh, thank you. Oh my God. Okay, hold on. Now Zoom is. Okay, we're on. I did one of the mutes, I guess. Hopefully we're okay now. Zoom, somebody give me a thumbs up. Whew. Just when I get going. Now, yeah, I think in the time left, I kind of wanted to give you some stuff with some teeth to show you what this looks like in a historical perspective, but also what is it that we know right now. I go backwards. I think it's important to acknowledge first that targeting women for being women, that is part of rape culture at large, that is misogyny. To bring current events into things, there was a stabbing in Australia where a majority of the victims were women. I saw a selection of memes basically saying, you know, misogyny is a form of terrorism. Why do we not see it that way? And I think what's ironic is it's probably one of the more universally experienced forms of terrorism if you at least think of the fact that there are, you know, if we have been likened, indigenous people, tribal people, they say we're the canary in the coal mine, that we are the thing that alerts you to danger, that it will inevitably befall everyone else. And the things I'm speaking about, the ways our women are hurt, the way we are hunted from our first moments, this actually is deeply familiar for at least approximately half of the population. And that's because the way we are hunted today as women, we were first hunting indigenous women in that way. And it is almost a constant expression of that kind of settler colonial line of thought that honestly, when it saw our communities, when it saw women who were vibrant, who walked and moved in the world as equals, who were sacred and shepherded the sacred nature of their communities, it was something that had to be targeted, exterminated, and annihilated for the continent to be settled. That's not unique to the American experience. We see that around the globe. And it is in many ways because even though they didn't have eyes to see how important and valuable that world was, they could at least appreciate that our women were the vehicle by which they got to the land. And so they targeted these things together. And that's why in present day, we also see that this crisis in particular, now quick pause, you do see different acronyms used. The missing and murdered, if we think of missing and murdered as, you know, it's adjacent to essentially the process of colonization and in turn industrialization. And so when we see, the different acronyms, we see MMIP or MMIR, missing and murdered indigenous relatives. I think that one is what we're going to see more of because you don't want anyone to feel left out. Unfortunately, our male-bodied relatives also experience grievous violence, of which I'll speak on shortly. But we also, again, it's because of that connection between the land and our women, our girls, and our two-spirit relatives that we see this epidemic particularly impacting female-bodied and two-spirit relatives. Now, the man camps, that's sometimes what they're called when you see kind of largely men employees at kind of industry camps in places where extractive industries are still kind of the main way of, you know, the big industries. You can kind of think the gold rush as the quintessential example. I always love to, this can sound messed up, I always like to tell people this, only because I think we should know. Redskins, obviously we've changed that name, as we should. Do you know what the 49ers were? Like even what it's a reference to? Also, I'm a Raiders fan, so like we could probably say both of these. We could say Raiders and 49ers are synonymous. The 49ers are a reference to the first miners who settled the state in 1849. They were rapists, they were murderers, they were genocide enactors. That is not usually known about the 49ers as a name, but that is what it is recognizing. Not on purpose, but if you know who and what happened at first contact, that is where you see us acknowledging in a certain way an unspoken history that once you know more about it, you'd wonder what else should we be rethinking. Nonetheless, though, the gold rush, that's kind of the quintessential example, but it goes to present day, whether you're looking at places like Alaska, where you're seeing really extreme extractive industries and a high male to female ratio, which in turn is highly correlated with a per capita rate for rape that is 3 times the national average. This is also, like I said, it's not just an American experience, a Canadian experience even. We see it arguably across the globe. The example of maquila workers in Mexico, young women coming to the city to work, help their families, and they are in a way targeted explicitly for violence, because that movement of expressing their freedom and their autonomy is interpreted as license and almost permission to hurt them. Juarez is where you see a lot of the kind of coverage of that coming out. But again, this isn't any one state, any one country that does it. It is by design. It is the system of settler colonialism. And it's only in present day that we're calling it missing and murdered, and we're showing how we don't have certain numbers. But it's also something that if you are from this community, you know is more real than the air you breathe. Because in order to keep breathing air, you got to know is real. Now, Canada is a really important example to learn from, the Highway of Tears. Essentially, we can look to Canada for some tangible examples where we're seeing serial killers, roving serial killers even, target Indigenous bodies for violence. I think a lot of people don't know that according to the FBI, there's 1,500 actively circulating serial killers in America by the estimates of bodies found. They don't know where they're at, but they find the bodies. And you should know they circulate the interstates. 99 isn't an interstate, but it's pretty damn close. And so the canary in the coal mine, though, if we can understand what's happening in our community, we can speak to this violence and head it off in others, because we are also experiencing simultaneously what's been called a cold case crisis, which I'll show a little more on the next slide. But essentially, if we think about California and the scope of missing and murdered, our records show that it is in the top 5 states. That's very much a reflection of the violence we're seeing in the northern part of the state, coupled with the fact that California is the most populous state for American Indians in the country. So we are seeing people be hurt and lost to the epidemic whose homelands aren't in the state, but are included in our work right now as part of the Department of Justice, trying to understand and how to honor, even if your tribe isn't in the state. They at the same time have a right to protect you. How do we start building those mechanisms? In 2020 to 2021, there was 18 open cases in California, and nearly 60% of these cases were happening above San Francisco to the Oregon border. And this was largely falling within the one Humboldt County Sheriff's jurisdiction. And I remember when I was doing my dissertation, there was this thing, I don't remember why they brought it up. It was just like, why would you tell us that? They told us that in an area, to give you a sense, Humboldt and Delaware County together, way at the top of our state, are about as big as New Hampshire or Vermont. I went to school in New Hampshire, so I remember always thinking, holy crap, I can't believe Humboldt's as big as a state. There was, at any given time, only 6 sheriffs on duty in an area roughly the size of a state, which meant if you were in certain parts and you needed help, you had to be ready to help yourself. You were lucky if they came, but no matter what, you were gonna have to wait 2 to 3 hours. That even if they wanted to get to you quicker, that's how long the drive time was. So we are actually seeing both a process by which these kind of, it's a rural police force. Most people don't appreciate that like 80% of our police forces in the nation are 20 people or less. So there is, we think of the LAPD, NYPD, these huge police states, separate conversation. On a local level, a great majority of crime is solved, investigated, and tended to by police forces of 20 or less. And particularly in rural areas, you essentially are seeing, if they can't solve it soon, those cases take second precedence to the active cases They're always coming in. And so this is happening in the northern part of the state especially, but we also know that people are coming to these areas to target us and hurt us. They know that there are jurisdictional loopholes that can be exploited. They know that they have the numbers in their odds. There's 6 cops in an area the size of the state. You can get away with murder. And ultimately, the murders are 7 times less likely to be solved. But we're seeing, right, non-Indians from out of the area perpetrating a great majority of the murders and abductions. And it's not just us, though. You should know that in the 60s, the average, it was like the clearance rate for cases was like 90%. If you're murdered, on average, 90% of the time, they figure out who did it. Not bad. You know, there were 1 out of 10 times they were really stumped. They'd never know. It's 60% now. And at that same time, we've invested simultaneously millions of dollars into policing. And you have right now a 6 out of 10 chance that if you were murdered, they'd figure out what happened. Everybody's got that chance. For us, obviously, it's disproportionately high because we represent a disproportionate number of those cold cases. I always pause, though, and remind you that it's not just, right, our women, girls, and Two-Spirit relatives affected by this. It is only our men and boys who stand next to us in many ways in terms of the severity of the outcomes and the chronic conditions we navigate daily. Our men experience multiple health disparities, including high death rates from both chronic and accidental causes. We know that suicide is one of the leading causes of American Indian men 17 to 24, and that their risk of suicide continues to outpace nearly every other group over the life course. Now, these are the same men who, traditionally speaking, were our protectors and would be in a position to be keeping us safe. They too are sick. Like I said, Emily said we have to help our guys first. They are more than 2 times likely than the non-American Indian population to die from homicide. According to the CDC, this is actually the group most likely to die from police violence, and we're incarcerated at a rate 38% higher than the US average for all groups. Now, these numbers are pretty wicked already, but they're actually usually underestimates, because we know if we were to get down to the level of the tribe or in communities where we're seeing a large tribal population, unfortunately, these outcomes usually only get worse. I always say we're at the top of the list if it's a bad thing, the bottom of the list if it's a good thing. It wasn't always like that, and we are gonna pivot to prevention, but I wanted to remind you that it's not just the missing and murdered. It's part of this larger experience of violence against Indigenous women. I often share the dark statistic that as an Indigenous woman, I am arguably just as likely to die by homicide as I am heart disease or cancer. I think the other 2 leading causes of death. The 3rd leading cause of death for American Indian women is homicide. We're also more likely to experience serious violence, kidnapping, and that means that when we are hurt, it's more likely to turn deadly. And again, it's usually a precursor to the disappearance or death. Now, I will be happy to talk more about why this is, but I think I've talked a lot about that, and I want to save the couple minutes before questions for prevention. But ultimately, we need to realize that the points of intervention are so much before someone is taken. All we need to talk about after they go missing through case closure, that is where the conversation needs to be. And the police, I often say, you know, by the time I'm talking to the police, I don't want to be there. No comment, but I just, no one wants to be making that call. And when you think of the ways your family member could have been made safe when you called for help before then, it's galling too to have to make that call. But I have to work with a lot of police, so I give them some due. And that would be that we are asking them in some ways to perform eye surgery with a chainsaw. I can't blame them for not being able to do what I need them to do because they don't have the right tools. And arguably, that's not what they're there for. They're there to intervene in a crime happening. That's what the police are for. We need to think of other ways to intervene. And again, it's before we're calling the cops. Now, ultimately, we are actually participating in part of this by speaking on these things. I wanted to not crowd the National Day of Awareness because I probably am on the road, I'm hoping. But that is traditionally when we recognize this. I think though, that when we save it for that day, we don't recognize that this is their world every day. And so for me, taking time today with you all is part of this intervention. But we also got to ratchet it out and think of where are all of us in this overarching structure of quote unquote rape culture. And I think it goes back again to American Indians make up 1% of the population. I didn't realize where I'm from, making up the community and being a part of the community actively was a very rare occurrence, particularly in California. But I know our world can be different because the world I'm from is different in very key ways. And we're trying to make it more different actually, because we are trying to express our sovereignty and keep ourselves safe. And we can't do that alone though, because again, we're only 1% of the population, and we need people outside of our families to care about when our families are hurt. And it's not after a case is open, it's fostering Indigenous lives before we're taken. It's including things like Indigenous voices on your syllabus. It's pointing out where settler colonialism is. It's everywhere. And you know what? Like, I benefit from it too. I have settler blood, clearly, so like, let's have a critical discussion about that and dismantle it, because I think these are very apt words in a global sense to do nothing in times of oppression, right? Sides with the oppressor. And ultimately, Indigenous voices at every table is what we also need, because I can't expect people who don't know us to be able to show up for us. But I do ask that you broker access and you take this knowledge where you go in the rooms that we might not be able to be in. Ultimately, being willing to sit in this space is also major. And I wanted to conclude just generally, like I said, is it's not just what women do and like how to keep them safe. We need to think about the whole system, keeping them safe. Our women are our life givers. There's a French painting, not to make it all tribal. I took French once upon a time. And it's called I think it's called The Beginning of the World. And it's an up close shot of essentially a lady's pubic area, because that is the beginning of the world for everybody. And many Indigenous cultures had coming of age ceremonies and rituals time and again to honor that specific responsibility. And it's on the level of responsibility versus right, collective versus individual. These are the levels and the changes we have to make on that level of paradigm, right? Now, with that in mind, I want to thank you guys for being here. We're going to transition to questions. We are also going to get set up for the candlelight vigil component, and we have some super safe flameless candles. So we'll take like 15 minutes for questions, and then we'll take a few minutes to get that going. But yeah, just to give you guys a sense, also nobody's eaten anything. So yeah, let's have some questions. Yeah.
Please. First of all, I just want to say thank you for your presentation and being able to, have like the emotional confidence to be able to talk about an experience like that. And I think as someone who's not Indigenous, but someone looking in, I think it's really important to, be educated in this space. And I appreciate what you're doing for missing and murdered Indigenous people. And I hope that you continue to help those who really do need it. And my question is, when it comes to like tribal policing, because I know that you were talking about how in certain situations, it can take 2 hours for tribal police to come, and sometimes they're underemployed to about 6 employers. I was wondering, has there been any kind of change, like in terms of like tribal policing, where it could become more localized and help can be more accessible to Indigenous people who really might need it?
Well, actually, a lot of the current, I would say, oh God, it's so weird. It must be frozen. I was like, my phone's getting ready to die, but it's like, am I a ghost? It can't see me. Now, Our tribal police, what's difficult is we think about jurisdiction. There is, depending on what state you're in, whether or not it's state or federal jurisdiction is a matter of law. And so in California, for example, we don't actually have criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians on tribal lands. We do have a civil jurisdiction, and we do have criminal jurisdiction over domestic violence cases under something through the Violence Against Women Act, the Special Domestic Violence Criminal Jurisdiction kind of provision. Now, similar to VAWA as a whole, those are dependent on being, their laws passed by Congress that aren't set in stone. They have to be done every several years, they expire. And essentially though, let's say, for example, the Yurok, we have jurisdiction over our reservation. We have one of the few tribal police in the state, but we don't have the same resources that the county does. And also, even though we might have know-how, we might have expertise, we have connections, and there's an office, there's all these things, we actually right now only have jurisdiction criminally over things besides those specific examples through an MOU with the sheriff. And that gets reset every time there's a new sheriff. And so right now, one of the kind of offered suggestions is that we see essentially tribal police get the right to police without having to go through the county. That could very well help this in a, when you think of first responding sense, and many hands make the work lighter. There's so many things that we can't expect external police to do for us, but it's also hard because if you think of the things that limit rural policing, a tribe's police force is only all the more constrained. But watched his kids, he was his babysitter. He had prayed with her in ceremony. Oh, I can't? Oh, no. Can you guys hear me? I don't know. I was like, oh, okay. There were so many people, and it's not just Emily. Like, that's the state of this, is that the people who are in the position to do something about it are themselves connected to the cases in an infinite number of ways. And that means that there's a different kind of toll and strain associated with the work. But it's also, I think, if we can enable with resources and capacity building, our tribal police would ultimately be who would be keeping us safe. And that's one of the things that we have lost through court decisions, but is a sovereign right to keep your people safe from people who hurt them. But it's been taken particularly from tribes in public law 280 states.
I have two questions. Would that be okay?
Yes, yeah. Also, thank you too for your kind words. I said it in my head, but wow.
Oh, you're welcome.
So my first question is that it seems that poverty plays a large role in the vulnerability of Indigenous people. Would you say that a lower SES or socioeconomical status is one of the chief causes? And if so, how to rectify it? And my second question is, being also an outsider to your and only having cursory knowledge of your culture, why would you say that women are being targeted in particular because of the cultural and spiritual aspects that you mentioned previously?
Okay, so, okay, wait, the first question, say it for me one more time. I started talking back to the second. Say that one more time.
My apologies.
No, it's okay.
Poverty, it seems to play a
Yes, okay, that's it. I was like, they're both really good. That's the thing. Yes, so yes, the poverty, inequality, broadly speaking, I could have talked about this for much longer. When you think of, like, even if you have resources in America, mental health is very hard to come by. But imagine simultaneously having these extreme overlapping, like generational inheritance of trauma and the mental health conditions that go with it. When we think of boarding schools in particular, that has there's a whole level of domestic violence and relationship violence that is a huge part of this story as well. And at the end of the day, that's actually why supporting our tribes economically is so important, because we would protect ourselves better if we could. And in a, kind of a cool California example, California has over 100 federally recognized tribes and quite a few more state recognized tribes. That's because of the incredibly genocidal history of the state. So the communities themselves are quite small in comparison to some of the bigger ones in other states. And so you kind of almost have this situation where you see the gaming tribes. A lot of people think, I don't have money in gaming, I wish. I got the salmon in the trees, I lucked out, but we don't have per caps, we have a tiny casino.
I should really bump
With
up
those
your
really big,
the numbers down, but we did real well today. So tomorrow should be another decent.
Wonderful.
Again, I swear, I don't want, Spirit likes to make us laugh. Cause I swear I haven't touched anything since I just checked.
So your people, the Yurok and particular, would you say that this spiritual aspect is a very context specific to your tribe and similar tribes, tribes that
Yeah.
have similar practices?
Well, so that's something, so I want to clarify, it's not that tribes who have financial resources don't have ties to spirit. It's actually just simply numbers, that many of our gaming tribes are our small rancherias that are the collections of genocide survivors where literally so many people were decimated, there was maybe 5 to 10 families left in one community. And every family has its teachings. What is the case for the Yurok is because, I don't know, we hid. That's how we stayed safe by hiding in our forests and they couldn't find us. And I mean, I've heard countless stories of people who have stories in their ancestral lineage where that whole bloodline wouldn't be there if that little boy hadn't hidden at this one key juncture. And so I think what's more important is trying to think of the different things we can all bring together. And while Yurok can't speak for everyone, and actually we speak, even the people on the other side of the river from us have so much in common and so different at the same time. Many of indigenous teachings stem from that sacred nature of the feminine as our life givers. And if you think of what was first and most egregious to the settlers who came here, it was that they saw us living vibrantly. And their world couldn't happen if that was true. I'm happy to say that I'm hoping, we talk about resilience and a colleague of mine, I want to end it here. We'll get ready to start doing candles. She said that it's so hard when you start learning and healing because resilience is something you've always said is something you value and you're proud that you have. And when you really start looking at your family history and what you inherited as resilience, it is not something you're proud of to say that I'm just really good at surviving pain. I come from people who were very good at enduring things that others were unendurable. And we were able to do it without a hair out of place. And that in a way was our resilience, to be able to be durable and to be strong. That is why I'm here today, because women like Alice Spot, women like my grandma, my mom, they were strong. But I think in this new world, part of that change is not requiring us to be resilient in a way that really just means I'm better at putting up with pain of a colonial condition. Yeah. Say, go ahead.
Connecting back to the original question of this settler colonial, I'll call it an attack for lack of a better word, an attack on reproduction. And I even think of the most recent, I just saw on Reuters a couple of days ago, an IVF clinic in Palestine literally being targeted, 5,000 embryos being destroyed in like one single shell shock. And how there's a literal tool of targeting and attacking reproductive rights of women, literal embryos, the children. And I would like to ask if you could comment perhaps on not just why, I think you've made a clear case of why and how the mechanisms of why reproduction in women get targeted, but how perhaps culture connects to how, kill the child, kill the Indian, kill the culture. How does reproduction and culture connect?
Well, I think that if you're kind of making connections to global circumstances, you should be. And for me, it's been a different world to live in since October, because the level of blood memory that is right now, because I know in me are the people who survived what is happening right now. And to know that I'm watching it can't do anything about it besides be in this space with you all is sometimes a level of infuriating that takes my breath away. But early on in that, I sought out my tribal judge and asked her, like, how do I make sense of these things right now? And she said that unfortunately, it's one of the oldest plays in the book, that if you take the children, that's the only way you can break a people down. Most people can survive anything except the loss of a child. And it's hard to know that that's something our communities experience chronically so. And sometimes, you know, that's why we come from big families too, is it's like, we almost have a directive to bring more Indigenous lives into this side because constantly we are being taken too soon. And indigeneity isn't just an American experience. And I think of Palestine, the parallels between Palestine and my people are so unreal because setting religion aside, Palestine is a place that's been shared by 3 of the world religions for time eternal. There are people who are Christian, Muslim, and Jewish living in that area, always have been. It is their sacred landscape, sacred geographies. We know there's differences across these religions just as much as they share this thing in common. My people, the Yurok, the Hupa, and the Karuk across the river, we come together and we hold all our ceremonies together. We pray together in 3 languages as different as German is to Spanish is to Mandarin. We lived in a world where people who lived in Wichipec were trilingual on a linguistic level. That's like, I think my head would explode if I knew that many languages that were that different. And since time immemorial, that is how we lived in that place. And we shared it in common because of how important it was to all of us. And I think of Palestine as a place that we're seeing, land you're willing to kill for isn't yours. Land you're willing to die for is. And so I think that would probably be my last comment on that, because there's a lot there that I could get going on. But thank you for bringing that into the space, because I do think it's an important to acknowledge. I want to take us to the vigil. We have enough candles for everyone, I'm pretty sure. And basically, we're trying to time this for a walk that will allow us to conclude while we see the sunset, give or take. So we are gonna assemble, I think, outside this door if we can. And we'll do candles, and then we're gonna do a little loop. So if you'd like to come with us on that, it's not gonna be fast. It actually takes a while for a lot of people to walk in a march. But 7:41 is sunset, so that's our hope. We'll be saying a couple words when we start the walk together. I love it. Let's see, that is my first thing like this. But yeah, let's get some food. Let's break for a second. Woo! Zoom, we are going to conclude this part. If I can bring you up on my phone for the vigil, I will. But I'm on 25%, so we might not get that to happen. But thank you guys for coming out, and I think if I just leave it alone, it's okay, but nice to meet you. Take a second. Yeah. Find it. Yes, thank you. I would say it's a whirlwind. You guys will be hearing more from me. I'm happy I got to see you. Wasn't it? Yes, I'm hoping they really good. Told them we gotta spend the cookie money, otherwise it's more cookie money.
Highly recommend. She's an amazing cook. For this semester too.
Hi, yes. I was gonna say, yes, you look super familiar.
Oh, okay. That's my other
Nice to meet you, yes. Well, thank you guys for coming out. It feels good to be seeing familiar faces.
It's more than when you look. It's
Thank you for participating. Let me, Dr. Blythe, Professor Blythe. I was almost made a joke, just don't call me, no. Yeah, Blythe, there are no, yeah. What's your name? Jarrell, no way. Oh, Jerome, I was like, only met one Jerome. I've met a few Jeromes.
Honestly, the only time I've heard of the name.